So with the first game being a huge success, we come to the second game, which was also my introduction into the franchise. Now back in my Sonic R video, I mentioned I got the Sega Genesis along with the classic Sonic titles for the holidays. But before then, I went to my uncle's house quite a lot and he had a Sega Genesis along with a couple of games that I played all the time. But the ones I remember playing the most were Sonic 2 and Street Fighter the Championship Edition. Now this game was actually developed over here in North America by the Sega Technical Institute, while a certain other game was being worked on in Japan, but more about that for another day. So with that in mind, is Sonic 2 an improvement over the first game? I think it's pretty obvious, but let's take a closer look. One thing I want to talk about with Sonic 2 is the box art. Now I didn't go into this in the last video because I just didn't think there was much to talk about. However, I do really like the Japanese and European box art. With Sonic 2 in Japan, they definitely get the point across. It's both Sonic and Tails, and that's pretty cool. However, the one we got in North America scared me a lot as a child. Why is Robotnik a giant now? I don't know why, but its design reminds me of Groundskeeper Willie, if he was possessed by Satan. As far as what's different this time around, each zone has 2 acts instead of 3. Mostly. You can find star posts located throughout most of the acts. Not only do they act as your checkpoint, but they also bring you to the special stage, but more about that later. In terms of gameplay, Sonic controls relatively the same as he did last time, but there is something more refined about the controls. That's not to say it controlled terribly in the previous game, unless you're playing the GBA version, but why would you do that? I can't really explain it, but I really feel in control of Sonic here. The addition of the spin dash definitely helps. And while he originally appeared in another Sonic 2, this is the first time we get to play as Miles Tail Prowler, or Tails for short. During a Sonic gameplay, he can be controlled by a second player, and he's practically invincible. Though you can play him by himself, and he controls relatively like Sonic, but he can't fly. I mean, you see him fly in after he's been off screen for a while, so what gives? Well, really good so far, but what about the stages? Emerald Hill Zone. I would call it the Green Hill Zone, but a lot more prettier. Chemical Plant Zone. This is definitely a fan favorite stage. And according to Sonic Mania and Sonic Generations, it's probably the most remembered stage from Sonic 2. And here you can speed to your heart's content. That is until you get to this part. The Aquatic Ruin Zone. Thankfully, this is less tedious than the Labyrinth Zone. In fact, you don't even have to go into the water as often in order to progress. But grounders work exactly like the Burrow bots did in the first game. And that's annoying. Casino Night Zone.
Remember kids, gambling is good for you.
Hilltop Zone. It's kind of like the Marble Zone, as it can be summed up as, the floor is lava! The stage. Mystic Cave Zone. This is my second least favorite zone in the entire game, mostly due to the Crawltron who pop out of the scenery when you need them to the least, and it's also home to the infamous Spike Trap that not even Super Sonic is a match for. Oil Ocean Zone. Slides, slides, and more slides. Metropolis Zone. This is my least favorite zone in this entire game. I'm not even kidding. Metropolis Zone can die in a fire. For some reason, instead of 2, this zone gets 3 acts, and it drags out. And you may be wondering, why do I hate this stage so much? Well, the unholy trinity is why. Not so much of the Astrons, minus the times I'm trying to use the screws to go up, and there's quite a few of them ready to explode. But the badniks that drove me up the wall were Slicers and Shellcrackers, who are the definition of edgeguard. Anytime I came across them, they were usually in areas that require precision platforming, or they can just completely blindside you, forcing you to tread extremely carefully. I have to say the Shellcrackers are worse due to their placements. They're almost always in a narrow corner where it's impossible to jump on them, and I can't just spin dash through them because of those big, meaty claws. Look at that face. Hate it! I know I had my fair share of problems with the Scrap Brain Zone in the last game, but it was understandable. It was the last stage of the game. It should be hard. It should be difficult. It should be overly challenging. But this is not even the last stage. This is just a cheap way to exhaust your lives and your continues. The Sky Chase Zone is probably the easiest stage of the game. It's quite a breath of fresh air compared to the Metropolis Zone, and this leads into Wing Fortress Zone. And let me tell you, if you don't like bottomless pits, this stage will leave you on edge. After chasing Robotnik into space because Sonic can breathe in space, we come to the final zone in the form of the Death Egg. where there's 2 bosses instead of 1 like last time. The first one is Mecha Sonic, though I always refer to him as Silver Sonic, not because of the Master System Sonic 2, but because of the Archie comics. He takes about 8 hits and his pattern is easy to figure out, though admittedly I died a few times as a kid against him. Then the grand finale of a boss is the Death Egg Robot, a boss you'll never see again after this game. And honest to goodness, for a final boss, he's actually not that bad, though he requires a lot of patience to beat. For the most part, I just wait for him to land, and then I run to the other side of the room. I mean, look, he can't even touch me. After Sonic defeats the robot, the Death Egg explodes, apparently taking Robotnik with it. Sonic falls back to the planet, and Tails meets him at the right time despite seeing the explosion happening. And thus concluding the Sonic franchise. Farewell, Sonic. Forever. Wait! As I said earlier, you can find start posts located throughout the different zones, and they'll lead you into the special stages, and thus begins my least favorite special stage style, the half pipe. Now don't get me wrong, it was quite ambitious for the time, but for some reason they thought it'd be great to keep using this or a similar concept in later games a little too often. While it is iconic and thankfully nowhere near as bad as some later games, I actually find the special stages to be very tedious. And I'll sum up why in 2 words. Target practice! No matter how much you memorize these stages, Tails has some delayed response to your control, which will result in you losing rings. Repeatedly! And it's even worse when he somehow gets in front of you. You might as well just say, "Please sir, may I have another?" But there's one thing I hate most about the special stages. Whether you get the emerald or not, when you leave, you're stuck with 0 rings. Why? So after collecting all the Chaos Emeralds, 7 this time, you get a reward, and I don't just mean a good ending. Here we're introduced to Super Sonic, who I find a little bit too slippery for platforming, but he's practically invincible except for drowning and getting crushed. There's also a 2-player versus mode. Here you race your friends in some of the stages from 1-player mode, but for some reason the soundtrack's a bit different. But I actually really enjoyed these tracks, so I wish they had their own zones in 1-player mode. In fact, now that I think about it, what I really love about Sonic 2 is the soundtrack. To put it simple, it is awesome. And don't get me wrong, I like Sonic 1's soundtrack, but this is where the songs became more memorable, I should say. And some of my favorites in this soundtrack include Sky Chase, both versions of Emerald Hill, both versions of Casino Night, Winged Fortress, Aquatic Ruin, and Chemical Plant. So in conclusion, Sonic 2 is definitely a great example of how to make a sequel vastly superior over its predecessor. Admittedly, I did have more problems this time around than Sonic 1, but I think it's an overall solid game. However, I think there's one game in particular, well, 2 games technically, that heavily surpass Sonic 2. When next we meet, we take a look at my favorite into the franchise, Sonic 3 and Knuckles. In the meantime, I'm Andy HG. Thank you guys for watching. I probably shouldn't do this, but catch you next time. Have you ever thought of this theme song with the Mystic Cave Zone music?